Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to the first UNH Sustainability Alumni webinar of 2023 and a very happy new year to all of you. I'm Fiona Wilson and I have the honor of serving as UNH's Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer and as Director of our Sustainability Institute. I'm also an affiliate faculty member at the Peter T. Paul College of Business and Economics here at UNH. I couldn't be more excited for today's conversation with these four amazing UNH alumni who I will introduce momentarily. Co-hosting with me today is my colleague, Alexis Dwyer. She is the Alumni and Network Stewardship Coordinator here at the Sustainability Institute, and you'll hear more from Alexis towards the end of today's webinar. We're really pleased to partner with UNH Alumni Relations to bring you this year-long Alumni Sustainability webinar series to our alumni community, because we know that we have hundreds of alumni from across the decades who are working in sustainability-related fields, people who have deep expertise and really valuable perspectives on these topics. And we also know that there are thousands more alumni who don't perhaps work in the field of sustainability, but who are really interested in the topic. So we've really designed these webinars to allow you to hear from UNH alums who are leading experts in sustainability across different industries and sectors. And today, as in each webinar, these alumni will be sharing diverse perspectives on the key trends, and you'll hopefully gain some very practical knowledge that you can use professionally and personally. I think UNH is a very fitting host for this webinar series. This academic year, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of sustainability at UNH with the establishment of the Sustainability Institute. And we're one of the first universities in the country back in 1997. If you go back a slide, please, Greg. We're one of the first universities back in 1997 to establish a comprehensive university-wide approach to sustainability. And it's really because of this long-standing commitment and the work of so many faculty and staff and students across the years that UNH today is one of the top universities in the country on sustainability issues. We were only the third university to achieve a platinum rating in STARS, and today we're still one of only 11 institutions that has that highest level of recognition. For those that don't know, STARS, or the Sustainability Tracking Rating and Assessment System, is a program of ASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And it's a really rigorous reporting platform that measures all aspects of how sustainability is incorporated across the university's curriculum, but also our operations, research, and our community engagement. And within this impressive group, we are proud to have the 5th highest score nationally. Before we hear from some of our alumni today, I wanted to share a couple of quick examples of why UNH is a national leader in higher education in sustainability, particularly on the topic of how we power our campus through sustainable energy. UNH implements a systematic and integrated energy policy that emphasizes health and integrity, climate protection, efficiency, cost effectiveness, and stability and fairness for all of UNH's constituents. And it's consistent with the priorities set by the UNH Strategic Plan by President Dean and also the UNH Campus Master Plan. For over 25 years, we've been exploring and demonstrating renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate adaptation strategies by engaging our students, faculty and staff, and the broader community in what we call the sustainable learning community, or really a living learning laboratory. We have all of those people serving on UNH's Energy Task Force, which was created in 2005 to help guide reductions in energy use, but also to look at energy costs and greenhouse gas emissions on campus. And we're really proud of our EcoLine project. It's an innovative public-private partnership with the company Waste Management and pretty unique in higher education. Through the EcoLine, landfill gas comes to campus from Rochester, New Hampshire. Methane gas, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. We actually take that otherwise would be emitted into the atmosphere. We take it through the EcoLine and we convert it in our combined heat and power plant here on campus called the Cogen plant to power the campus. We're also contracted to support small New Hampshire-owned hydropower operators who also help to supplement that power that comes from the EcoLine. Next slide, Greg. UNH has long been a leader in climate and emissions scholarship and operational best practices. We were one of the charter signatories to the climate commitment in 2006, and this really commits UNH to a goal of carbon neutrality and requires us to track and publicly report our carbon footprint and maintain an up-to-date climate action plan, which we call WildCap. UNH set an ambitious goal of halving our emissions between 2001 and 2020, and we actually achieved those reduction targets before that date. More recently, with the adoption of WildCap 2021, UNH set a new goal of reducing its primary emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2, 75% below its 2010 baseline. And so we're proud of this work. We encourage you to learn more about it. I think Alexis has been putting some links in the chat that will allow you to learn more, but we welcome you to reach out to us at any time. Next slide, Greg. So as we go through the webinar today, we will have time at the end of the hour for questions from the audience. So please put your questions in the chat anytime and we'll get them into the queue. Next slide, Greg. Today's webinar is on a topic that is high on many of our minds. How do we as a planet make the necessary transition to sustainable and renewable energy with the urgency that's needed, especially in this pivotal decade leading to 2030, but also in a way that really ensures that the transition is just and equitable? This was the focus of the recent COP27, the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Egypt back in November, which garnered a great deal of media coverage a few months ago. But now, after the coverage has died down, the questions remain. What is the path ahead? And what does this mean for each of us professionally and personally? And while there's now broad acknowledgement of the urgent need to scale up our global response to climate change, navigating the options, knowing how we can best contribute can be overwhelming. So in today's webinar, we have alums who work in the sustainable and renewable energy field, who will hopefully help demystify this landscape for us and share some actionable insights. So I'm really delighted to introduce 4 amazing alums. They span the private, nonprofit, and public sector. And they also span 4 decades of graduates, which is pretty incredible. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a little bit more detail, but first up is Dan Clapp. He graduated in class of 2000 and is co-founder of Revision Energy. Tricia Dinkel, class of 2012. She is the director of Cleantech Navigate Northeast at the Northeast Clean Energy Council. We also have Charlotte Harris, a graduate from 2018, who's a trade officer looking at offshore wind and clean energy for the British Consulate-General in Boston. And last but absolutely no means least, Scott McDonald, class of 1990, who is Vice President and Managing Director of USource, which is a next era company based here in New Hampshire. So we'll stop the screen share and I'll hand over to the panelists. So Dan, love to have you go first and say a couple of lines about who you are and your work.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for having me on this panel. Yeah, I'm a proud UNH alum from Life Sciences and Agriculture, Environmental Conservation major, graduated in 2000. But I'm also a co-founder and CIO, Chief Innovation Officer at Revision Energy. And it's been a wild ride over the last 12 years, but we have, we're an employee-owned B Corp. We work in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, where we have locations. We do, we span renewables. We do solar photovoltaics. We do electric vehicle charging, battery energy storage, basically, and I'll get into it a little bit later, but beneficial electrification, whatever we can do to transition off fossil fuels, whether it's in the commercial, residential market, we're addressing it and we're trying to, bring power to the people across New England, northern New England. So it's a pretty exciting time to be in this field. And I look forward to speaking in more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I love that phrase, beneficial electrification, and you're doing that work across residential and business and municipal clients.
Correct.
Yeah, it's been so wonderful to see the growth of Revision Energy over the last 10 years. Really impressive. We'll hear more from you in a minute, but I'd love to ask you to introduce yourself as well, Tricia.
Absolutely. And just to echo Dan, thanks so much for having me on the panel. It's really an honor to be speaking to an audience such as this, but also to be on a panel with my fellow panelists. So I am a proud graduate school UNH alum, graduated from grad school there at 2012, which feels like just yesterday. So I'll continue to pretend it's 2013. My current role, I'm the director of NECEC's Navigate program. NECEC stands for the Northeast Clean Energy Council. It's a trade organization and learning and research facility. On one part, we focus on policy initiatives that will help guide the clean energy transition, supporting businesses regionally in both policy advocacy as well as education and best business initiatives to guide that transition. And then on the other side, which is where I run our program, Navigate is innovation. So encouraging and strengthening the pipeline that will bring these technologies to market that will help us address some of our most pressing environmental and energy challenges.
Thank you, Tricia. It's been so great to connect with you this past year, and yeah, excited to hear about some of the innovation work you're doing with some of these promising organizations. Charlotte, let's turn to you, hear a little bit more about who you are.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Fiona, and everyone who tuned in. It's really lovely to be here. As Tricia said, a real honor to be among this impressive group of UNH alums. So I'm a trade officer focusing on clean energy and offshore wind at the British Consulate in Boston. So I work on behalf of the UK Department for International Trade, which is the commercial arm of the UK government. And our work here in the Northeast is all about promoting trade and investment between the US and the UK, which we do through supporting British companies that want to come over and land in the US, and also by supporting American firms investing in the UK. And all facets of clean energy. I've done a lot on offshore wind recently, which is an exciting way that the UK can help the US scale up their clean energy economy with their unique supply chain and expertise. So happy to be here today and share more as we go along. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Charlotte. And Scott.
Yes, hi, I'm Scott McDonald. I'm a 1990 graduate of the University of New Hampshire, and really proud that the University of New Hampshire is a platinum, and that's fantastic. I think one of the top schools in terms of sustainability, which is really great. I am currently working for NextEra. NextEra is a Fortune 200 company. They are the largest renewable producer in the world from wind and solar. I head up their advisory practice. So over the last 4 years, I've been working with commercial, industrial customers, institutional customers, helping them think through strategy around decarbonizing, and then helping them implement those strategies. I've been in energy actually since I graduated from UNH. So this what's fantastic as I've seen the transition of the energy industry, and super happy to be involved in this latest iteration, which is helping folks decarbonize and become more sustainable.
Wonderful, Scott. Thank you so much for being with us and for all the great work that you're doing. So I have a few questions that I have discussed with the panelists that I'm going to pose to them, and then as I said, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A from the audience. And again, you can put your questions in the Zoom Q&A function at any time, or get them in the queue. Alexis is going to help me queue those up. But my first question for all of you on the panel, I referenced COP27 in Egypt back in November. And of course, we had the passage of the badly named really Inflation Reduction Act back in August, which, I think many of us recognize as, one of the most significant pieces of legislation to address the climate crisis. Not perfect, but certainly some big stuff in there that will hopefully accelerate the transition. And we're now kicking off this new year, 2023. So where, in your opinion, are we in this transition to a more sustainable energy future? Are we doing enough to raise our collective ambition in the climate transition? Scott, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I think we're still pretty early. right, in the transition. When you look at where we are in terms of renewable energy and what percentage of our power production in the United States is from renewable energy, it's about 20%. A significant amount of that is still hydro, which has been around for a while. So I think about 12 or 15% is now wind and solar. And that power sector is only part of it, right? You also have industrial and you have the transportation sector, which are very much at the beginning stages. I think we've seen an evolution on the corporate side with ESG, environmental social governance, and how that is driving corporations to look how they can become more sustainable. Personally, in my own experience, I'm seeing that in the marketplace as we work with these customers. And they're very much still a lot, some have done a lot, but many are still at the beginning stages. And certainly on the transportation side, we're going to see a massive change, right? And I think one of the things out of the IRA was continued new incentives for electric vehicles. We'll continue to see the electrification of the transportation sector and likely also alternative fuels. So I think we're also going to see hydrogen play a role, particularly in long haul truck transportation. So again, I'm super optimistic, and I really think there's a path now, particularly in the United States with the IRA and those incentives to get us to a really what will be a zero emission economy by 2050.
Yeah, thanks so much, Scott. Dan, maybe you also represent the sort of commercial sector, the for-profit business sector, but very different company to NextEra. Where is your head at on this topic?
Yeah, thank you. I would say if we're looking at it as if we're running a marathon, we're probably only in mile 2 or 3. Early stages, like boiling it down specifically in New Hampshire, when I first got into the industry, solar photovoltaic, was priced at, $7-8 a watt. We're down to $3 a watt. So we've seen a tremendous decrease. But with that said, over the last 12 years, specific to New Hampshire, we're still only at solar is providing 1.3% of the state's collective electricity needs. More, as Scott mentioned, more on the hydro and biomass side of things, but we have a long way to go. You compare that to our neighboring states. Maine is 6%. Massachusetts, who's got a head start here, they're at 20%. But we have a long runway, and what's exciting about the Inflation Reduction Act is, it's giving us that runway, that 10-year runway, where it's extended the tax credits for solar for 10 years. And it's really starting to implement and push, electric vehicle infrastructure, build out, try to stay ahead of that. That's very exciting. More domestic manufacturing of batteries that we're going to see ramp up, which is pretty exciting here. So, overall, we're just getting started, and we have a long way to go here, but it's quite exciting.
Yeah. Long way to go, but also a lot of opportunity.
Lots of opportunity.
Yeah, for everyone. Tricia, let's go to you next. Where is your head at the beginning of this new year?
Sure. No, and I would agree strongly with the comments that Scott and Dan both made, and I think would probably only add, just in the sense of we are very much at the early stages, knowing that this is going to be a monumental type of transition to even get to an area where we are able to say we're making tangible progress, and that tangible progress is sustainable long term. I think an area too where we're exposing through the little progress that we have made still requires a severe amount of attention is making sure that as we transition, we are prioritizing equity and justice in that transition. And we know historically, as a society globally, we've not been great. In fact, that's a very polite way of putting it in doing so. So I think we already are seeing how the imbalances of this transition are really affecting populations that are under-resourced. and underrepresented in these conversations. So I think largely, not to do too front forward of a call to action right at the top of the webinar, but ultimately having those priorities in mind as early as we can, knowing that we are still pretty late to the game just in terms of prioritizing this type of transition and really emphasizing this work in everything that we're doing as a global society. I think making sure that we're putting just as much effort into those factors of the work. So.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that, Tricia. At UNH, since the founding of the Sustainability Institute in 1997, we've really, thanks to our founding executive director, Dr. Tom Kelly, we've really used a definition of sustainability here that really spans today the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and really thinks about ecological integrity in all places, but also sort of well-being and dignity for all humans. And I think we in our own work here started to sort of center racial equity and equity of all kinds in our work probably 10 or 12 years ago now. And so I'm really glad that you sort of raised this as a really important part of this transition. Thank you. Charlotte, let's hear a little bit from your seat about how you're thinking about the world at the start of 2023.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's an interesting inflection point. On one hand, there's this exciting progress of this landmark US climate bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. And I come from a policy background, so it was incredibly exciting to see that actually go through and have a lot of the incentives that have been tested and proven to help transition consumers and power grid and businesses, really help them transition into clean energy in a way that's hopefully not burdensome on costs as some other ways. And on a global scale, the Inflation Reduction Act has had a massive impact, essentially changing the tides of where clean energy investment is flowing. So previously, Europe and that the UK and Germany and places that had been at the forefront of setting greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets and incentivizing clean energy investment were drawing a lot of money from big multinational corporations to build a battery plant, to invest in a hydrogen cluster or a carbon capture system in their manufacturing sectors. And now we're seeing that it's pretty much going to flow the opposite way across the Atlantic, which is exciting for us in the US and also represents a lot of opportunity for global businesses to enhance their prosperity as well. So I think there's excitement there in terms of getting it implemented. There'll be challenges on supply chain and workforce. Those issues just keep coming up. But I think overall just means that we need more hands working on this and as many diverse perspectives working on this as possible, because we really have to get creative about the solutions. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think that's a great sort of transition to the next question, which is, Tricia, you touched on this a little bit about, what are some of the barriers, right? Why are we not seeing the action at the scale and the speed that we need? What are some of the barriers that we need to all be aware of and try and work to dismantle? But also I'd love to hear, I know, some of you are working on some very specific things. So I'd love to hear just about some of the really exciting opportunities or promising trends that you see. So Tricia, why don't we start with you for that question?
Sure. Well, I'm fortunate to work on a side of talking about climate change mitigation, but also the clean energy transition. I work on a side that, innovation, it's inherently optimistic in the sense of being able to be creative and innovative about what those solutions could potentially be and how those technologies and people can collaborate to produce some real tangible, long-standing solutions. That being said, I think one of the exciting things is seeing, Charlotte mentioned on it, and specifically when we're talking about climate tech, so technologies that are addressing the impacts and mitigation of GHG emissions. 2022 was a monumental year in terms of clean tech and climate tech investments, up 80%, I believe, was the last quote from 2021, meaning that there's definitely a bit of caution to use when you see those numbers skyrocket the way that they do, but at the same time, it does signal that this is a priority, not just environmentally, but financially as well, and an investment that you're making. Of course, you're always going to see the dollar signs in terms of why you're making the investment, but the broader impact that those investments make, and really starting to highlight what the benefits of doing so in terms of moving the needle forward. So I'd start there in terms of an optimistic note on that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tricia. Charlotte, I know you work with all kinds of innovative companies as well, and have the benefit of seeing what's over the pond in my homeland. Share maybe some of the exciting things that you're seeing that you think might be flowing over to this side of the Atlantic.
Interesting. Yeah, I think offshore wind has a lot of potential. For fixed bottom offshore wind, it's pretty mature industry. So the UK has about 14 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity installed, and compare that to the US, which I think we have maybe 14 megawatts or so, which is a small proportion of the rest of the globe. So we have a lot to do to catch up. And I think just as many ideas and innovations flowing over from our global partners as possible is going to be key. And floating offshore wind is the next frontier. The US agency that handles the leasing of offshore areas, BOEM, just made one of the first steps in getting California ready for offshore wind, and that will have to be floating because of the depth of the water. Gulf of Maine will have to be floating. And so we have to figure out how to commercialize that, which has some really interesting opportunities. And yeah, I think those are what we look at a lot. Hydrogen has some potential to get at these really hard to abate sectors in industrial and heavy duty vehicles. So I think we kind of need all hands on deck, and really hoping that the innovation flows from below, and anything we can do to support those innovators getting in touch with the global marketplace is really important.
That's awesome. Thanks. Scott, you work with large multinationals on their decarbonisation work. What sort of big innovations and/or barriers are you seeing, in that sector?
Yeah. Again, big picture to start with, I think the Inflation Reduction Act and having a long-term framework that everybody can operate under is super important, right? We lived in an environment before where production tax credits, investment tax credits were always going to expire. So you're always, from a corporate point of view or a business point of view, you're looking at that. And that was a big factor in how you were looking at investing, right? And was a barrier to investing in the future. So that framework has been awesome. And then, as Tricia was saying, the innovation behind that, right? Because now you have incentives that are out there that are making these technologies, these emerging technologies, more competitive. And now there's all kinds of money and investment going into these innovations. So we talked about some of them. What the other cool thing about the Inflation Reduction Act was we only had a framework, around production tax credits and investment tax credits for wind and solar. And it took a much more comprehensive view. So now there's incentives for hydrogen, which is huge. So we see some applications of hydrogen, particularly for ammonia, right? Initially as being cost competitive now or very soon. Right, and other applications that will take a little bit more time. Renewable natural gas, there are incentives. So folks are making a lot more investments. We're seeing that BP made a $4 billion investment. NextEra itself made a $1 billion investment. So all of these things are coming around. On the other side, let me just kind of flip quickly. I think some of the challenges, right, that we face are on the grid reliability, right, and transmission. So as we put more intermittent resources onto the grid, like wind and solar, battery, hydrogen as a storage, natural gas, which is a big storage, right, for us today, needs to be decarbonized. When we go to corporations, we talk about scope 1, a big part of that is the fuel they're using, not the electricity they're buying, and how do you decarbonize that? So there's all kinds of innovations around those alternative fuels that are now being looked at, and new businesses being developed that will help drive that. And that innovation, I think, will continue, right? And I think some of the constraints that we see around grid reliability and transmission are creating some of the opportunities, right, that these businesses are coming in and investing around. So we're seeing a lot of investment on how to manage the grid locally, right? How do you optimize the grid with these various assets, as an example? So I'm super optimistic. There are definitely challenges, but I think the framework is great, and then I get the big picture is framework's great, and then we have such a culture of innovation and a mechanism to invest in innovation. We're starting to see a lot of that.
That's great, thank you. Dan, what would you like to add to this topic about opportunities and trends and or some of the barriers?
Yeah, Scott kind of touched on a little bit there, where some of the barriers is point of interconnection or overall interconnection as we bring on more distributed generation. We need to attack that in a way that's smart. And we have the innovative technology. We need our utilities to also be innovative as well and to help bring those online in a smart approach. And there's been many good examples of that. Green Mountain Power being one. But we can, and utilities are starting to do so. And it's just a matter, and the Inflation Reduction Act also incentivizes the utilities to do so as well, to bring some more of that distributed generation online. But one good example at the local level in terms of innovation has been the community choice aggregation that was passed over the last few years. And that allows towns and counties to pool their resources and source their energy needs. And now they have more choice where they can, pool renewable sources as well. In the result, hopefully, is reduced price of energy and the energy portion of our bill. So that's pretty exciting happening in New Hampshire as well. Scott touched on it as well, but battery energy storage, right? Like whether it's behind the meter at your home or in front of the meter at a substation, we need storage to kind of balance out all the generation from solar and wind. That's coming online. Massachusetts has been relatively aggressive. New Hampshire is, hopefully not too far behind to roll out some demand response programs, and we can use that both in our commercial businesses and our residents as well. And as what we're going to also see with electric vehicles is pretty exciting, where they can also join the demand response, right? You basically have a mobile battery storage component that can power your home. So vehicle to home, they call it V to H, or vehicle to grid, V to G, where utilities will give you a signal and you'll discharge your vehicle battery and get paid for that and reduce all the peaker plants. So there's a lot of innovative approaches to the problems here that it's well on its way, and that's what we're going to be looking forward to.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot of opportunities for innovation, but also sort of the need to collaborate across sectors. And just a peek preview on February the 16th here on campus at UNH, but I think there'll also be a streaming option. We have a panel event where the CEO of Unitil, who is also a UNH alum, will be speaking, along with a couple of other leaders in this space. And so it'll be really interesting. I'm really interested to have that conversation with Unitil's CEO about the role that the utilities will play in this transition as well. We've got some questions coming in from the audience, and we'll get to those in a couple of minutes. Keep putting your questions in the Q&A. Let me just ask sort of one last question to the panelists before we get to the Q&A. So, for those that are maybe trying to sort of navigate this, make sense of this, what is the viable action, also the advice that you would like to give to people today? Maybe you want to comment on people in their business capacity. Maybe you want to comment on for people in their own homes or in their local communities. So I would love just to hear your advice on sort of the viable action that you'd like to share with everybody on the webinar today. Tricia, why don't we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. Well, where to start, right? And whenever there's, particularly, given the audience, I'm sure there's a varying degree of the involvement and knowledge in specific areas or just general areas. So I would say, in just speaking to, assuming that you want to start somewhere, is to start locally. And I say that advice because understanding what the local opportunities are will help inform and grow your knowledge as you look elsewhere, both regionally, nationally, globally, to understand, to compare, contrast, and to hopefully contribute in terms of, local initiatives, as, Dan was speaking about. Community aggregation, that's a huge opportunity for you to learn more about the process and to be able to demonstrate both in your own personal life, but to show areas where you can help educate others and inform others about those local opportunities. The big picture, though, keeping that in mind, I find it very valuable to have touch points, educational touch points that are as simple as looking at organizations that provide newsletters, so you are getting the news that's industry specific or general or whatever you find most valuable, but to really come up to the learning curve. It's not a topic that just because you don't want to pursue it professionally that it won't affect you, and it's somewhat unique. I mean, there are other industries that are like that, but it's certainly as we just look at climate change and the impacts that it will have globally, whether or not it's what your salary is based off of, or just what your general career goals are. Outside of that, it is going to have a huge impact. So whether it will affect your professional life, even if it isn't your job, to understand it. And I think that it's very interesting to know. It's as we all have pointed out, it's a very exciting time to be informed, and there is a lot of information that's relevant regardless of your knowledge or your involvement. So if anything, just starting on that educational piece, knowing who to connect with. I will say that the broader ecosystem is so collaborative. People are more than willing to talk your ear off about what they do, whether it's in renewables, whether it's in storage, battery technology, if it's on the technical side, if it's on the general side, or even if it's on the educational side itself. I'd say, find what interests you, but keep an open eye and an open ear. Start locally, and then broaden your interests as you continue to understand what's going on around you and how you can be involved.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Tricia. Scott, what advice would you have?
Yeah, well, let me give you my advice from advising businesses and corporations. So I think there's a lot you can do, right? So it's actually kind of complicated, and depending on where you are and what you can do, you got to look at what makes sense. So you can do things all the way from, look, always start with something like energy efficiency, right? That's sort of a local thing, right? But if you can reduce what you're using and do that more efficiently, that's a great way to get started. And then we see a lot of businesses maybe put their toe in the water with renewable energy credits or carbon offsets, which are making a shorter term commitment. One of the bigger issues is if you're going to contract for a renewable, you're typically doing that for a long period of time, maybe 10 years, maybe longer. So as a business, it's harder to make that investment. But for very large businesses, it's really the only way, right, to get there on your scope 2 emissions reductions, right? Once you move past just purchasing renewable energy credits, you got to be looking at utility scale PPAs or virtual PPAs to cover all of your electricity purchase load. And then it can be very regional, right? So in some places, as Dan was alluding to, there are community solar programs. So if you're in a place like New York, Minnesota, Illinois, and there are others, those are very attractive, and that's an easier way to just, to get your foot in the door and start to do some. Those programs are set up by the state, so they're subsidized. So it's actually, as a customer, as a business, you're not actually paying extra. You're benefiting. You're actually getting a bit of credit from that, and then you're also using a renewable energy source. So that's another great way to get started. So there's lots of technologies, lots of options, and the answer is really different for almost every company in terms of, you know, how do you get started, given the goals that you have.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Scott. Dan, anything you'd like to add in terms of advice on either on the residential or commercial side?
Yeah, thank you. Scott covered the commercial side really well, so I'll take it more from a residential lens.
Perfect.
And you know, I'll fully admit it. There was a day where I did not care about what a kilowatt hour was, right? Like it's not on my top of my head, but it's important to have that general awareness, right? What are you actually consuming? What is your carbon footprint? You know, and it starts with your house, right? We consume a lot of energy in our homes in America. So it's good to get that general awareness of what your energy demands are. And then, as Scott was mentioning on the commercial side, a kilowatt hour saved is extremely valuable, right? So you always look at the energy efficiency side. Any New Hampshire residents on this webinar, you know, go to newhampshiresaves.com. The utilities run a great program there that will help you save on the energy side. But then, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, you know, we look at it from a beneficial electrification perspective, right? We go into homes and we'll say, you know, your hot water, your base load electrical that's, you know, powering your computers and your lights, your heating and cooling needs. We'll take a look at all that in transition off of oil and natural gas, propane, whatever it is, and back it up or power it with electrical, heat pumps, heat pump water heaters. The technology is there. And then obviously our transportation, right? We're going to have, all of us will soon probably have an EV in our driveway in the next decade with EV chargers. And then what we try to do is we power that with photovoltaics, with local generation, whether that's on your roof, in the backyard, or as Scott was saying, like it could be a community solar farm that you could join. There's lots of them in Maine. We're still getting to roll them out in New Hampshire, but it's just having the general awareness of what you're consuming in your house and then educating yourselves on the options that you have moving forward to reduce that carbon footprint.
I love it. Thank you so much. Charlotte, I think that I can already see a question specifically for you in the chat. So I'm actually going to transition us into the audience Q&A if that's okay. We've got some great questions coming in. There's a question here that I think is really interesting, and I'm selfishly want to hear what you guys will have to say around this. The question is, what kinds of skills are needed as we work towards this energy transition? What kinds of skills are you seeing that need to be part of this industry? And what role specifically do you see universities like UNH playing in this sort of workforce development that will help support this transition? I will throw it open to anyone who would like to answer that.
I have some thoughts. So I think some people are surprised to realize the scope of jobs available in the renewable energy space. You can be a lawyer working on permitting. You can be an HR professional trying to staff up these huge firms. You can be an engineer. And then obviously there's the trades jobs. I feel like we hear a lot about those, and maybe that's what people immediately think of. And that's amazing that that's an opportunity. But I would urge universities to integrate climate curriculum into probably every program. And then hopefully that inspires students to think about, even if they want to go be a lawyer, they might be interested in applying the law to environmental permitting or taking legal action against companies to promote greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So there's just such a broad range. And I just wanted to quickly plug, I'm happy to talk with any alums, especially any young current students or alums about the renewable energy world. I studied communication and Spanish at UNH, so you can definitely transition from basically any field. I will credit Fiona for one of her classes I took that introduced me to the concept of sustainability in business. That was really interesting. So I think that's kind of why I'm thinking students can learn about the opportunities through their university courses and then get inspired to work in the field.
Yeah, thanks for that, Charlotte. Yeah, we not surprisingly, we love that idea that all students graduating from UNH should have, that knowledge of the climate crisis and tools to address it. So thanks for sharing that very much. Tricia, I know you had some thoughts on this topic as well.
Yeah, and I think Charlotte said it so well in terms of how it should and will continue to extend to, it won't be industry specific. You don't necessarily have to be technical or have the energy background in order to pursue a career or opportunities in renewable energy. And on that note, I think because of the evolving nature of renewable energy as an industry and the technologies therein involved, the prize skill that I've observed has made for someone who can successfully navigate through a career in the relative industries is one whose willingness and ability to stay curious and to be constantly learning. It's so dynamic, and it's again so evolving at a pace that is in a good way rapid, probably not as quick as we all mentioned at the beginning, not as quick as we'd like, but it does require an ability to stay current, not just with the technologies and on the technical side, but on the policy side, on the community side, understanding the opportunities that aren't always as obvious, but the willingness to learn about what the future holds, because ultimately, energy is kind of a in the future type of wide industry. It is always something that we're going to be pursuing, the next greatest, most resilient thing out there. And so if you have that ability to be, as cliche as it sounds, a lifelong learner, I think that that's a skill that will translate so well and so effectively when pursuing or working with renewable energy or just in energy touch points.
Yeah, that's great. And just on that point, Tricia, UNH is increasingly looking at how do we do lifelong learning for our alumni. One of the things that we launched last year, my colleagues, Dr. Ali Leach and Jen Andrews, a certificate in carbon footprinting. That's a very affordable 4-part series certificate in greenhouse gas emissions accounting. There's a question here from Dr. Cameron Wake, Lamprey Professor of Climate and Sustainability. How does offshore wind change the renewable energy picture across New England from your perspective? Charlotte, you'd like to go ahead?
Yeah, I can pick that up. So thanks, Dr. Wake, and thanks for all your work. So your first question, just so others are aware, because I sense probably a number of them are in the New Hampshire, Maine, Northern New England region. And so it's interesting to know that there'll be a large offshore wind development off of the Gulf of Maine, far off into the Gulf. But the time frame for power generation, so BOEM is looking to do the lease in 2024. I think, and just to give a sense of the length of the process, the first commercial scale offshore wind development in the US is one called Vineyard Wind, which is in Massachusetts, south of the Cape. And that is hopefully coming online this year and was leased all the way back in 2015. So it will take a long time. There's a lot of layers of permitting and community engagement, which is great. But hopefully what we're trying to do from the UK perspective is just to provide some insight on how the UK was able to scale up the industry and get the developments permitted responsibly with community input and all of that, but also with some urgency because of this nature of the climate crisis and the threat. So it's a bit of a long-term thing, but lots of opportunities for people to get engaged. I think there'll be a lot of opportunity for infrastructure upgrades on ports, transmission line upgrades when the power comes ashore. So lots to do, tons of opportunities across the supply chain for businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses. If you have a specific engineering component that fits into the offshore wind development, if you have a consultancy that does surveying, there's protected species observing, all kinds of opportunities. and lots to prepare for. So we're working with the states. The UK has an MOU with the state of Maine, a memorandum of understanding on renewable energy. We've sent officials from New Hampshire to the UK to get them excited about what the picture could look like. And so, and then Massachusetts, tons of connections there with the great state officials and agencies like Tricia's, that organizations that have been working on that. But I think it's a tremendous opportunity to create utility scale renewables, which is not easy to do, especially onshore, because we don't have a lot of available land in our condensed areas, and knowing that we want to also conserve our forests and the things that make New England so special in our farms. So the ocean provides a really exciting frontier for renewable energy, and obviously trying to do that as responsibly as possible.
That's great. Thank you, Charlotte. That's amazing information. Thank you. I learned something in that too. Great question here from Jason McBride, one of our wonderful UNH sustainability alums. New York Times reported this morning that a Korean solar company plans to build a $2.5 billion plant in Georgia. The company said that the Inflation Reduction Act was a key factor in the decision to open the plant. Domestic solar panel and wind turbine manufacturing creates jobs and boosts local economies. What is the future of solar and wind manufacturing here in the United States? Scott, maybe question for you, Dan as well.
Yeah, I think it's positive, right? So the incentives that were set up in the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of those are linked to onshoring production of the renewable assets, right? Solar and in particular solar. And I think so those incentives will help, as you're seeing, right, attract companies to actually build and expand here in North America. And we've certainly seen issues with supply chain where much of the solar manufacturing was based in China, and with tariff issues and labor issues, right? I mean, that became problematic. So I think from the incentive and locating it here, we expect that to grow, and I think that will be a good thing for the stability of the renewable business in North America.
Yeah, Dan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what Scott said. I mean, he's spot on. The one example in the question, I think you can multiply that by 10, right? I believe there's about 10 different large manufacturing facilities being built, incentivized by the IRA, and it's really going to help with the supply chain. We've had a tough time in the industry over the last 6 to 8 years on the supply chain issues. So I'm looking forward for more domestic production for sure, and I think that should overall just make it drive the price down even further, and result in more distributed generation. Yeah,
that's great. We're just going to end with a quick sort of rapid fire question to each of you before I hand it over to my colleague Alexis Dwyer. So thank you all for so generously sharing your time and your insights today. Just in sort of 20 or 30 seconds each. We've talked about a lot today. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot of opportunity. There's also a lot of barriers. What is the sort of one thing you want to leave folks in the audience with today about why you have optimism around this transition? Or just any closing thought you'd like to share in a few seconds. Dan, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this panel. I'm honored. I'm optimistic because, at a high level, we don't have a choice not to do it, right? Like we have to. And what does make me optimistic is we do a lot of work with elementary and middle school students, and when we have a little tiny climate classroom that we roll around, and just to see how interested and passionate they are. And actually everybody graduated from UNH and who we hire, bring on, that's what makes me optimistic. Everybody is ready to dig in and solve this issue that we have. And it's, you know, humanity depends on it, honestly, is my opinion. So I'm very optimistic. You know, we're going to make tremendous progress over the next 10, 20 years and set ourselves up for success.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Scott.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Fiona, for inviting me to participate. It's been a pleasure. I guess the thought I'd leave is, you know, I think with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, we have a framework that lasts actually multiple decades. And I think that, again, I'll go back to the point that creates stability for businesses and investors, right, to invest and innovate. So I think that's why I'm fundamentally optimistic. I mean, it's been difficult. Obviously, this whole thing stems from the idea that a lot of this is an externality, right? And we've struggled from a public policy point of view of how to address that, because you have to address that somehow if you're going to tackle the problem. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act was really our first significant legislation to move us in that direction. And what I like about the incentives and what I see in my day-to-day as I work in this industry is the tremendous amount of innovation that's happening across all these different value chains, from solar and wind to battery storage to hydrogen to electric vehicles and charging stations. And I think as that grows, the economies of scale will help to bring costs down even further. So it's reinforcing momentum. And I think for me, I can see a path to a place there where we can essentially be a net zero economy.
Yeah, it's a great thought to end on. Tricia, closing thought for you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I absolutely agree with what's been said so far in terms of looking at the optimistic side and where we're headed. I think the biggest thing that I see aside from those already mentioned is, and what keeps me optimistic is the collaboration that's continuing to emerge from this. We saw, you know, what type of a global, when there's a global experience that everybody is going through, such as, you know, the pandemic a few years ago, and that we're still navigating our way through, it changes the way that we approach things, and it changes the way that we work together. It obviously doesn't always result in the best case scenarios, but it certainly has the opportunity to do so. And I think that this is the opportunity to really show how collaboration in so many different ways. I don't want to even limit what I'm referring to collaboration, but in so many ways. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be the only way that we get there. And I think that that's actually a really wonderful silver lining about this whole process, is that it is going to require collaboration. And I think ultimately, to Dan's point, you know, humanity depends on that collaboration, and that dependency and that urgency behind it is going to only produce, you know, and to bring up innovation again is innovative ways of collaboration. And I think that in addition to technologies and services, collaboration itself has to be innovative in how we're approaching this and how we're addressing it and how we're all working together.
That's great. Thank you. And Charlotte, let's close this out with just maybe a couple of words because we're short on time, but you know, yes, you represent Gen Z. So what are your closing words for your generation?
Yeah, I'm excited that I think the pressure from all generations, and particularly the younger one, has really made a difference in policy. And then the policy leads to changing the way the balance sheet looks for businesses. And then that makes them more inclined to make these large scale investments. And that trickles down all across the supply chain, even for medium and small businesses. So I think we've seen that play out recently. And that is the proof that what we've been doing is working. So that's exciting.
I love that, Charlotte. Thank you. So thank you again, all of you. I want to just introduce my colleague, Alexis Dwyer, who's our network and alumni stewardship coordinator. Alexis is just going to share a few things with you about our next webinar and other ways that UNH alums can engage with us around sustainability here at UNH.
Yes, thank you so much, Fiona. I am Alexis Dwyer, the Program and Network Stewardship Coordinator here at the UNH Sustainability Institute. And I'm so delighted that you all joined us today. And of course, now we would absolutely love to keep connected with you. So here on the slide, you can see some different ways we've listed to get involved. If anything piques your interest, such as hosting a UNH Sustainability Fellow that happens during the summer, and the fellow would work with you and your organization on a high impact sustainability project. And we're really excited because this summer we have Revision Energy coming back to host a sustainability fellow. Or perhaps maybe you have just interest in coming back to campus and speaking with students to share your experience. So any way that you think that you'd like to get involved, or ways that aren't even posted here on the slide, we have other opportunities than the Sustainability Fellowship. I'd love to talk to you and connect and meet and figure out how we can partner together and share our strengths. And of course, I'd love for you to attend our other UNH SI events. So you can sign up for our newsletter where you'll hear about those events to be able to sign up for them. You can also join our LinkedIn group. We have a growing UNH Sustainability Alumni group where not only do we share out what the UNHSI is doing, but that's great opportunities to share with us what you're doing. And you can search for the UNH Sustainability Alumni group in LinkedIn and request to join, and we'll approve. And I think it might have also been chatted into the chat as well. And then, of course, we hope you'll join us for our next session in the alumni webinar series. So you can go to the next slide on February 15th, where the topic will be sustainable investing. So how we invest our money, we can be even more powerful than the products we choose to buy in shaping a sustainable future. So we hope you'll join us as alumni experts in the field of sustainable investing, discuss what trends are taking place and what they mean for you and your own investing. So you can see our incredible list of guest alumni speakers here on the slide, and we hope we'll see you then.